An arrest has been made in the rape of a 10-year-old Ohio girl who was forced to cross state lines to procure an abortion. 27-year-old Gerson Fuentes was arrested Tuesday after police say he confessed to raping the child on at least 2 occasions. While DNA test results are still pending, officials say the victim has identified Fuentes as her rapist.
The arrest corroborates the Indy Star's initial July 1st reporting on the victim's cross-state travel for an abortion. Their viral story drew scrutiny after Washington Post fact-checkers struggled to verify key details. Emily Jashinsky joins us now with her reaction to these developments. She's culture editor at The Federalist and co-host of Rising Fridays. Welcome, Emily.
Good morning, guys.
So what do we do here? You know, we had high-profile state individuals like Jim Jordan, representative from the state where this happened, you know, saying that this was likely a hoax. You know, many people were convinced by this fact check that at very least there was something fishy going on here. There was a lot of reason for some to think that Democrats had, you know, cherry-picked a vaguely corroborated story and that this was their comeuppance. This is something that they've done before, and people felt very justified in saying that there was a high likelihood that this story wasn't false. And now things have flipped rather dramatically in the last 24 hours. What's to be said about this?
Well, yeah, and the reason we're doing this segment is because we wanted to follow up on our own coverage. You know, I don't think any of us here has a problem saying if we get a story wrong. I've certainly been wrong before, and I promise you it will happen again. The difference is if you're okay saying it. So I thought this story was very fishy, too. I'm perfectly happy and content to admit that. And I think you guys may have shared that to some extent. I mean, just going back to the original Indy Star story, I actually think this whole confusion is why the critique stands up perfectly well of that Indy Star story. This is why, I mean, I teach journalism to students at the National Journalism Center. Part of my job is, as a director there, we used this story in class to show what not to do as a journalist. And I went back and I looked at it. The story had a single source who heard this secondhand. Every major city in Ohio told the Washington Post when Glenn Kessler went and checked that they had no record of this, even though there would be a mandatory reporting requirement. The Ohio Attorney General said he had no record of it. And the paper, the Indy Star, wouldn't tell the Washington Post, and it didn't include in its original story whether it had made an effort to contact law enforcement. And so when you have all of those things together, you have great reason to be skeptical of a story like this that is then being used for political purposes and as a political pawn by a political cause. In this case, it was the president and the Democratic Party. But one thing we were careful to do in our coverage, and I think is very much worth reiterating now, is say there are 2 sides to this. There are 2 different points to the story. The first is whether it is broadly representative of something that will happen in the post-Roe world. And we said yes. The second is whether it's true. And to that first point, according to the Post, I think it was according to the Washington Post, in 2020, there were 52 women who had abortions under the age of 15 in the state of Ohio. That is a really important tidbit of information. That is very real. And that is a very real part, not just of the 2020 landscape, but of the post-Roe landscape as red states like Indiana, purple states like Ohio, debate new laws about what to do in the cases of rape and incest. And from the anti-abortion side of this argument, I don't think that the pro-life movement should run from that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, and I did agree with you when we talked about this the other day. I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that, look, this story, according to the Washington Post follow-up reporting on it, was describing an unusual and atypical occurrence. There are not a lot of abortions performed on people that young. It doesn't happen that frequently. It was a kind of extraordinary claim, but that didn't mean it didn't happen for sure. Just that I think it was right to be a little skeptical of it, given that there wasn't a ton of corroboration initially, and it was fine to proceed from that. Now, what I think some people on the right did, and some people in conservative media then got over their skis and started immediately saying, hoax, didn't happen, and now look rather foolish for going that far. because now we have had it really dramatically suddenly confirmed.
Yeah, but it's
at
more
that
than
point.
looking foolish, right? If you're an Ohio State representative who tweets out that this story is a hoax, and to be clear, the fact check said there wasn't corroboration. That's a very different thing than saying it's patently untrue or it's a hoax.
Right.
A hoax suggests intentional misrepresentation, right? And then to just go ahead and delete that tweet without any further comment, without any apology or discussion, the likes of which we're having now. What people are afraid of is that this is going to be used as evidence, not just that this one event didn't happen, but that stories like this don't really happen, that people who raise concerns about what these draconian abortion laws, like the ones that are being contemplated in Ohio right now, the effects that they will have on children, like this 10-year-old who was raped, likely when she was 9 years old, because she just recently had her 10th birthday, according to this new reporting. What are the implications of that? And while I was critical of Joe Biden, trying to perhaps exploit a outlier example or a really extreme example for his own political gain without necessarily reaching out to the family and trying to find more and support and help, I think it's not really in question that it's much more pernicious to take a story like this, which is possible and credible and does happen all the time, and use it to justify laws that would put a girl like this in a situation of having to have difficulty in attaining an abortion, and also smear potential victims who are going to now have a harder time coming forward because their literal state representative is out here saying that things like this couldn't happen.
Yeah, no, and you made a really good point on the segment also, and you compared it to the story that actually did turn out to be false about CBP whipping migrants. And what you said was, I agree with it completely. We don't need to hyperbolize stories to use them as political pawns, because the reality is already bad enough. And this case actually really proves that and underscores the point completely, because 52 young girls under the age of 15 getting abortions in a single state in 2020 or any given year, I actually think that's a shockingly high number.
Yeah.
And I think if you follow these issues, that this happens way more than maybe some people realize. It absolutely does happen. And that's why when I went back and looked at our coverage, the headline said hoax ? Well, Jim, to your point, outright called it a lie. And then the Wall Street Journal editorial board called the story, quote, fanciful. That is going over your skis. That's not the sort of nuanced and important media critique, because that Indy Star story never should have went to print, precisely because of reasons like this, because it's so doubt over an individual and an individual tragedy that has now become a national sort of football needlessly, because they had a story that was not well corroborated, and it should have been. They should have had law enforcement on the record in the story. They should have said they reached out to law enforcement in the story, and instead that had to happen down the line. It appears that the person who has confessed in this case to the rape on more than one occasion, twice, is undocumented. That's what the follow-up reporting says. So it's going to continue to be a national football and a national pawn. The tragedy will, but calling it fanciful, I think, is a good example of exactly what not to do, because this is the reality. This does happen, and it's a
mistake I occasionally, or maybe more than occasionally, see people in right-wing media make when they have all these legitimate criticisms of the mainstream media, criticisms I share because the mainstream media does get things wrong, does have reporting that is wrong or biased, but not all of it is wrong and biased, right? And then when you're condemning the entire institution of the media, then you miss that alternative media also gets things wrong. We get things wrong sometimes. Like it's not just the mainstream media, but then the mainstream media thinks that all alternative independent media is everything they say is lies. It's not. It's all. We are all fallible. We're all capable of error, and the best thing you can do is just admit when you got it wrong. So we're glad this story. Glad is the wrong word. I wish this story had never obviously happened. It's absolutely horrible. But we will continue to discuss it. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll have more Rising after this.